Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Public Works Committee will come to order. We have this evening, as usual, a general agenda and a consent agenda. Are there any items that need to be pulled from the consent agenda?
C1, please.
All right. There's only one left. Is there a motion for approval of C2?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah, push the buttons.
I don't have any buttons.
Did you sign in?
I did. I hit join.
Yeah.
No, not checked. Didn't we?
Somebody push the motion.
I made the motion.
All right, so we need a second.
Sign in.
Well, I'm in.
John, just push the second.
I pushed the first one. Did he beat me out?
Oh, man. I was going to say
We're trying to push the button, and the buttons aren't being pushed.
It seems to be unanimous. Either way, we can.
I'm instructed that I must go by the electronics.
We are all digital. You know what? Your karma isn't any better than mine.
there's some fourth graders laughing at us.
But they're not voting either, so. Oh, you got to join. No, you're joining. I love electronic efficiency. I'm going to keep poking on that until it gets more efficient. Whoever gets.
I have a defective machine.
Okay, when it comes up, those in favor of approving C2, please punch the big green yes.
They kicked us off the committee.
Can we record them as yeses and move on?
I'm going to go home.
All right, we're recording them as yeses and moving on. It's unanimous. Item C1, please.
Item C1, resolution authorizing contract for Hazen and Sawyer to perform engineering design and construction administration services for water quality improvement work at Washington Park in the amount of $250,610, properly located in the South Ward.
Mr. Larson, do you want a presentation or just have a question?
I would like a quick overview of this. This sort of catches me by surprise. I'm very excited to see something happening here, but can somebody explain to me exactly what we're trying to accomplish with this?
Certainly, Mr. Larson, members of the committee. What we're doing is a project to take care of erosion and water quality problems that are occurring in the park. A couple of years ago, we assigned the Stormwater Division to look at some of the parks that we've had problems with. Recreation had previously been trying to deal with those problems. They are of such a magnitude that it was beyond the expertise of the Recreation Department to be able to handle these problems. We had severe, Washington Park specifically, had severe erosion that was affecting adjacent properties with runoff and other problems like that. We also have a water quality problem going into the creek, Salem Creek, obviously, which we need to address, and it's associated with fecal chloroform, and that is a function of having a dog park close to a public stream. So this project will actually be putting in a stormwater management system to pre-treat the stormwater that runs off the park before it's allowed to go into the stream, and it'll also be abating some of the erosion problems that are being caused by the park's stormwater system.
There it is.
Okay.
I would move approval, but
I can't. I don't know that I can do it either here.
Do you have any other questions, Mr. Larson?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, motion by Councilmember Taylor, and we need a second, and the machine's not accepting Mr. Larson's second. However, he does second, and let us consider the vote here.
Montgomery's out on the left.
Here we go.
In favor?
Everybody vote yes?
Yes.
Montgomery, do we have a yes?
aye.
Okay, we've got 4 yeses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Let's move, please, to item G1. Now, this is the review of the recommended budget for mass transit. I polled committee members, and there was consensus that we had the questions answered that we needed from previous presentations, except for one specific question, which I spoke with our Transportation Department Director just a moment ago and her staff, and they confirmed that routes 101 and 107 both are proposed for added Sunday service.
Good.
Are there any other questions regarding the proposed transit budget? If not, thank you so much. And
Require a motion.
it doesn't require a motion. That was an information item. Item G2, I believe, is also an information item.
Item G2, information regarding small cell systems ordinance.
Mr. Turner.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, as you recall, we've discussed small cells in the past, a couple of meetings in the past. Specifically, last month, we talked to you about some specific language we would be bringing back to you in an ordinance. You have the draft version of that ordinance language in front of you. It's just in front of you for information and any feedback you wish to give us. If you're comfortable with that, we will eventually bring it back to you for consideration and hopefully adoption, if you're comfortable with that. The issues at hand, however, are that there is state legislation working its way through that could affect what our final ordinance would need to look like. It's House Bill 310, and it has not yet been finalized. It's in its 5th version, and so we have drafted our ordinance to be in compliance with the version that was available to us at the time of drafting. However, for all we know, something may have changed in the most recent version that will require us to change it, and that will continue to be the case until the legislation is finalized. However, you would have the option, if you adopt it before the legislation is finalized, to revise your ordinance in the future to stay in compliance with the state statute. Be happy to answer any questions you have on the ordinance.
Questions or comments? Mr. McIntosh.
Give me an update on what has changed in the most recent HB 310 update.
I'm not sure.
Carmen, do you have any information on it? I mean, the issue was seemingly from the league, or the North Carolina League, that the providers were going to be able to come in and install a tower basically anywhere they wanted to in the right of way. And I know there was a lot of pushback on that. So I'm just wondering where the sticking points are now.
I'm not aware of what the sticking points are. We'll be happy to prepare you a summary of what changed from the previous version to the current, from the version that this ordinance is based on to the version that the legislation is considering now.
I think it's actually changed again. It's in the Senate Rules Committee right now, but we probably need to just go ahead and prepare a memo that explains those differences. I know some of those differences were worked out in terms of input from the municipality and the fact that it's going to take away a lot of the control of the right-of-way of the cities, and I know that was minimized some in terms of impacts, but we can do a memo that kind of gives you an update.
I mean, is there any reason for us to pass this one where we're going to be subject to whatever gets passed relatively soon?
We will have to have an ordinance in place in order to establish what our rules are under the state statute. So the state statute would allow us to set our rules by ordinance. So if we don't set any rules, then we don't have any rules, and the state statute allows us to set rules.
Okay. All right.
To be honest, I think the 310 is probably going to pass relatively soon. There's been a lot of work on it. I know some cities still do object to it, but there's been a lot of work on it, so I expect that it will pass pretty soon. So I think we can probably just wait, bring it back in August.
There is no specific project that's a time pressure. At the time we were preparing the council package, we had one request that was pending to the city that needed to have a response. We've given the response at the staff level after determining we had that authority. We rejected the request as framed by the petitioner and told them that we had these issues and they can come back, but at the staff level we had issues with it, and so it didn't require council approval.
I would imagine we'll get an update from the league between now and August.
I'm sure.
Yeah, because they're usually pretty good about it. Okay, thank you.
And your question, Mr. McIntosh, about the 310 budget, 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 the authority to put a tower in where they want. Are you talking about the small facilities
cell.
and the right-of-ways, and not the big
No.
towers? Okay.
No, yeah, 310 is all about the small cell.
All right. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't.
Right,
You're not
right.
saying anything.
Thank you. Other questions, Mr. Larson?
Could I be clear about, made clear about the authorization of placing such devices in the H district?
The current statute says that they're not allowed in historic districts or historic overlay districts except with the approval of bodies that they name. And I can't tell you specifically what they are sitting here, but it's the equivalent of the Historic Resources Commission. The way we've written our ordinance is to say that they're not allowed in the historic district, period, based on the assumption that our historic resources would not approve such a thing.
Right.
But they would be allowed in historic overlays if the Historic Resources Commission approved that.
Authorized.
That's the way we've written ours. Now, that may not stand up in the final version of the statute, but that's the way we've got our ordinance written currently.
Right now. Okay. Thank you.
Here's what it says now. It says the city may deny an application only on the basis that it does not meet any of the following. And one of the following is the historic preservation requirements in subsection 168, 400.55H. We can look at that and explain it more in detail.
Would we pay some attention to that, just make sure it doesn't fall through the crack? You know.
Any other questions, comments? All right, if not, we'll expect this back in August. Thank you very much. And item G3, please.
Item 3G, G3, resolution authorizing the granting of easements to Gregory and Claudine Meyer, property located in the East Ward.
Thank you. Granting this, Mr. Turner?
Yes. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but this item will require consideration. In the downtown area, the city has buildings that have basements that extend out under the sidewalk. In many cases, that is a remnant of the way that buildings were provided with some basic services when they were constructed in the 20s and 30s, whatever. We have a situation where this building has a basement, and in order to satisfy some loan or whatever conditions, they require that the city give them an actual an easement for that extension under the pavement, under the sidewalk. We've done this sort of thing before and are recommending council's approval. Staff has no objections to it, obviously.
Questions? I have one, and then we'll go to Mr. Oh, and Mr. Montgomery has one. I assume that the terms of the easement would include guarantees against collapse risks.
We normally have a liability protection for anything that we sign off as the attorneys review.
Okay, and perhaps provisions about how about an inspection or a safety.
We're going to show that. We're going to make sure of that as well.
Right, thank you, Mr. Montgomery.
Well, I'll be abstaining on this item now, just in the sense that I'm not familiar with the current ownership of the property. I don't on its surface see a challenge with it. I've actually been in this building several years back, and in the basement level, to Councilmember Bessie's point, there is some challenges in the lower level of this building, the basement, subfloor of this building, both in the rear side of it, which actually somehow potentially has a connection to the building next door, and then also the piece where you actually can see the section of the building that moves under the sidewalk of the building inside of it. But on the surface, again, I don't see a challenge as long as we have those accommodations that Mr. Bessie mentioned.
All right. Mr. Montgomery, do we need to retain this in committee?
I don't. If I can get the answers to a couple questions, just reaching out and continue to reach out with some folks prior to Monday. I don't have a problem with it.
Okay. Were there other questions? Mr. McIntosh, yes.
Is this, do we know if this is in view of an upcoming sale? Is there an event that this is preceding?
That's the impression I got. I don't know that.
Okay, so timing may matter. Right.
That's,
So
right.
I would assume there's a change of hands since there's a bank involved. And the bank will not loan money on a piece of property that they don't know that they've got the ability to pull back in 100% should things go bad.
And that's what has happened in each of the previous ones we've had this
Right.
come up.
And we're going to have this, we're having this discussion also on the Pepper building, are we not?
Correct.
Right, okay. So it's not uncommon for us, but we do, how quickly can we assess what our risk is by, the street caving in?
Well, we can do it by Thursday for your Thursday package. And we'll have another one, as you say, on the Pepper building. That's a slightly different situation in that the city did a project there. So our responsibility is greater there than here.
Mr. Bessie?
Yes, sir.
My thought on this is that as much as I do know that this is a transaction pending, these owners are actually newer owners of the property because the property's transitioned a couple times here, more probably in the last 5 years. But due diligence is in their part as well to ensure that they communicate with individuals as well. So,
By our rules, if we send this forward with an abstention, then it goes on the general agenda. Okay. Well, very good. Is there further discussion? Is there a motion? Is there a second? Is there someone who wants to second?
Second, since he's totally out of the picture.
We
get
got
no
the
vote.
second. Very good. Now, so when it appears,
no.
vote yes, no, or abstain, please. You have the Jeopardy music playing in the background here. There we go.
But I'm voting in favor, but I'm totally.
Mine is an abstention.
All right. So it passes with 3 in favor, none opposed, and 1 abstain. Abstention by Mr. Montgomery. All right. We'll go to item G4, please.
Item G4, information concerning proposed changes to on-street handicap parking ordinance.
Very good. I believe Mr. Turner is also in your bailiwick.
Yes, sir. No action required on this one. The committee may recall that you had some questions about handicap parking in residential neighborhoods. What I've attempted to do here is give you 3 possible options that you could add to your ordinance. I've also talked to Councilman Larson, and he's got some additional ideas for additions, but the 3 options I've put forward to you are that requests would only be considered in residential neighborhoods where the adjacent property owner themselves is requesting it, or where staff from the city DOT needs to address it for a traffic operations reason. In other words, you, as a property owner, would not be able to request a handicap parking zone in front of someone else's property, only in front of your own property. Second option would be to limit the amount of handicap parking frontage that would be on a residential property to 1/2 of the width of that residential property fronting the street. And the third is that we would go back every 2 years and reassess whether that handicap parking zone was still needed in that residential neighborhood. Be happy to answer any questions or take any feedback.
Questions? Mr. Larson?
I'll weigh in on a few things here. I think this is a good start. I do think we need to formalize the application process to how one actually initiates the request for a handicap placement and the criteria that's laid out front for receiving that, and particularly tie it into the handicap tag and the date on that tag as to how viable or how long this handicap sign might be appropriate. There needs to be some documentation that this handicap space is in fact warranted, and I'd like us to look at that. I'd also like to look at the fee or the cost for implementing these signs. This cost of the sign, cost of staffing, monitoring the sign, coming back. This is not like a downtown sign or like something that's in front of a church that's going to be there in perpetuity. This is a sign that likely is going to change through time and needs continual attention to make sure that its relevance still exists. So I'm curious about that monitoring and aging out of signs that we're able to have the staff and the time or whatever it takes to monitor this particular situation. Lastly, I'd like to kind of make some assessments as to availability of putting handicap parking in a place that in fact does meet the need. and that is, there's certain places that you could designate handicap parking, for example, in Washington Park, but for all practical purposes, it's not going to assist getting a wheelchair into the front door. And I think some on-site evaluation has to be made about availability of existing parking, off-street parking, connection of sidewalks, driveways, that there's an acceptable route relevant to a handicap parking designation, and that we're not just trying to keep people from parking in front of your house. So those are some criteria that I would suggest that we begin to consider as we look at this, but particularly I'm looking at the ability to monitor and find out whether these signs are still relevant through time, and the only way I know to do that is to link it to the date stamp that's placed on the handicap tag that belongs to the owner of this particular property. That has to be part of the application process.
Other comments? Mr. McAdoo.
How do we know that the parking space is actually out in front of the correct piece of dirt? Are we going to have to do surveys?
Well, we would look at the address of the petitioner and make sure it matches with the address of the request.
Yeah, but in tight urban neighborhoods, I could see there being issues whether you're in front of my house or in front of your neighbor's house.
We do already have that kind of language in our parking restriction ordinance or policy. We say that you can't request a no parking zone, for instance, in front of your property, your neighbor across the street's property, only in front of your property. So we deal with that currently, but I understand your concern.
I don't think first of all, I don't think we're going to have a whole ton of these, but that's definitely something I think could pop up.
Ma'am.
Yes.
Chairman. Follow up sort of on that line of thought, in that right now the way it's written is it's 1/2 of the lot frontage could be dedicated to handicap parking spaces. I think we ought to maybe consider not just the distance of the lot itself, but the actual size of a handicap parking space and what that means. So it's either one space or two spaces. I'm not interested particularly in getting more than that. I think probably my initial response is that a resident would be authorized under the ordinance to have one handicap parking space, assuming they meet the other criteria that we've established. I'm not sure that we need multiple handicap parking spaces. That's something I guess other council members can weigh in on. But I think, considering again the size of the lots that we're dealing with in some of these neighborhoods and everything, you start putting 2 or more handicap parking spaces, and you basically eliminated on-street parking entirely.
What about tiny houses?
Well, tiny houses is even worse. They'll have a driveway, I'm sure.
The cars pulling those.
All right. And Ms. Turner's, my comments would be that I like condition 1, only from the adjacent property owner. I like condition 3, reevaluation every couple of years. By adjacent, in condition 2, you're talking, the adjacent property is the requesting property owner, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd be that hardcore about that. Particularly if you've got a tight lot size situation and you pretty much need all the space they've got for the one parking place. But I think instead saying like a maximum of 1 or 2 parking places for a residence, we do need to leave some room for other folks on the block. Those would be my thoughts. Other comments? All right, thank you. Then, when do you anticipate coming back?
Have we had any conversation with the mayor's handicap advisory committee or anybody else on this matter yet? Not yet. But I think it probably would be appropriate at least to begin to circulate some ideas, see what the thoughts are in the community.
Okay. That's a very good suggestion. Thank you. All right, that was an information item, and that's all on my agenda. Do any members have anything else you need to bring up today? Mr. Turner, do you have anything else?
Nope.
No.
In that case, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We are adjourned.
Thank you.